All right. Hello, everybody. Cameron Cook here. I think this is the presentation you've all been waiting for, right? You've been so excited to hear about King and Kitchener's reflective judgment model. I'll be presenting today. Or maybe you're like me, you've never heard of King and Kitchener before. But the first lesson that I learned in this exercise is that you all are quick on the draw, and this was one of the only ones left. So the first lesson I learned is to be more decisive and quicker with my picks. But with that said, we'll jump in. King and Kitchener is based on William Perry's scheme. It's a foundation of a reflective judgment model. It's the foundation of we're going to call them K and K, the judgment model. There's a bunch of words on this page telling you a little bit about William Perry. I'll share this. Obviously, I'll share the slideshow. So if you'd like to learn more about Mr. Perry, you can, Dr. Perry, you can look it up. But basically, his scheme was a model for understanding how college students understand knowledge, the ideas that they hold about knowing, and the way which knowing is a part of cognitive process of thinking and reasoning. So a little bit more about his model. It's actually 4 stages of mental and moral development. I think somebody covered him in one of their presentations, and I can't remember who it was, unfortunately, so I apologize. But there's 4 stages: dualism, multiplicity, relativism, and commitment. So this is basically K and K were they were doctoral students and they were studying this model, and they basically thought that he lacked the fact that some young adults reason with assumptions that are beyond relative positions. So they thought that his last stages emphasize individual development of identity, values, and ethics, not cognitive development. So the reflective judgment model is also about cognitive development. So in 1994, King and Kitchener wrote Developing Reflective Judgment, Understanding and Promoting Intellectual Growth and Critical Thinking in Adolescents and Adults. Basically, they provide a framework for educators to help students enhance their problem-solving ability by learning to make defensible judgments about vexing and complex problems. There's a wide variety of interactions with students that can be used to foster reflective thinking in college. Student affairs professionals' challenge is to stimulate students to ask more complex questions and make more effective judgments on complex issues. This model delineates 7 consistent patterns that describe how students approach complex issues and defend what they believe. So with K&K's reflective judgment model, there's several obvious theoretical influences. Dewey, Dewey's, everybody's the basis for a lot of higher education theory. He set the definition of reflective thinking, the observation that uncertainty is a characteristic of the search for knowledge. There's a couple more here if you'd like to review it when you get the slides. There's also Broughton, development, I can't say that word, so development after relativism. Earliest stages of development are more characteristic of children than college students. Fisher, cognitive skill theory model of the development of complex reasoning. An individual's development range falls between optimal and functional levels. And evolution of thyself, interpersonal relationships as a development continuum. That's Keegan. So these were just some philosophical and theoretical basis for King and Kitchener, besides Perry. Perry was obviously their primary influence. All right, a little bit more about the reflective judgment model. So basically, the conceptual framework for reflective judgment is that of a stage model characterized by 7 distinct but developmentally related sets of assumptions about the process of knowing or the view of knowledge and how it is acquired, justification of beliefs. Each successive set of assumptions is characterized by a more complex and effective form of justification. So the importance of reflective judgment is, and its assessment rests in the questions that academics and practitioners pose about the effectiveness of their teaching, their programs, and their interventions. So basically, the big question is, am I doing all that I can to help students think more complex ways to reason more reflectively? I got that one a little out of order. I apologize. All right, so reflective judgment continued. It's the process of reflecting on emotions, feelings, experiences, reactions, and knowledge, creating connections between them, which leads to learning. It's awareness of knowledge, assumptions, and past experiences. It's an active and dynamic process that keeps on developing and evolving with learning and responding to new experiences, situations, and information. So it's a cycle, right? It's not just, hey, you get to a point you're like perfect at reflective judgment. It's as you learn more, as you become more self-aware, as we have different experiences, reflective judgment changes and adapts over time as well. So critical thinking. So yeah, I forgot to mention that. So reflective judgment versus critical thinking. So critical thinking is the ability to think in an organized and rational manner, understanding the logical connection between ideas or facts. And it involves rational and unbiased analysis or evaluation of factual evidence. Uh, Critical thinking questions ideas and assumptions and analyzes them critically without accepting them at face value. We identify, analyze, and solve problems systemically instead of by instinct or intuition. So that's one thing I kind of, this is not a tangent, but I kind of put this in here because when I was doing my research, I, I got kind of confused between critical thinking and reflective judgment. So yeah, so just really wanted to make that delineation. So basically, just to summarize the difference between the two, critical thinking involves thinking in an organized and rational manner, understanding the logical, that's the important word, connection between ideas or facts. Reflective thinking, on the other hand, involves reflecting on one's emotions, feelings, experiences, reactions, and knowledge, creating connections between them. So one thing I learned, I thought this was pretty interesting. Critical thinking involves a wide range of thinking skills, and reflective thinking is part of critical thinking. So it's not a versus thing, it's all one thought process. So when you're thinking or when we're thinking analytically, rationally, logically in critical thinking, it adds a different dynamic to add the reflective judgment model to bring in our, how are our emotions and thoughts and feelings uh, affecting our critical thinking. I can talk about that one. So basically, it's a little bit more about reflective judgment. Enhanced problem-solving ability is a result of engaging with reflection. Describes the development of reflective thinking, an aspect of critical thinking that is distinctly focused on ill-structured problems. Ill-structured problems, that's the big one. So these are not like, what are we going to have for dinner type problems. These are complex, complicated, big picture. Sometimes we don't feel like we have a voice or we can make a difference in these kind of problems. But they're ill-structured, complex, and controversial, that are vexing, and for which a solution cannot be known with completeness, certainty, or correctness. One of the most important responsibilities educators have is helping students learn to make defensible judgments about vexing problems. So going back to the 7 stages of reflective thinking, there's pre-reflective reasoning. That's the belief that knowledge is gained through the word of an authority figure or through firsthand observation rather than, for example, through evaluation of evidence. So this is like really when we're just, we're taking things at face value. Students are believing what the professors told them or believing what the media or what have you, or their family. People who hold these assumptions believe that they know what they know is absolutely correct and that they know with complete certainty. People who hold these assumptions treat all problems as though they are well structured. And as higher education professionals, I think most of us have come to the point, at least I know I have, I don't like to speak for everybody, but problems are rarely well structured, right? It's always gray, it's never black and white. So stages 4 and 5 are quasi-reflective reasoning. So that is the recognition that knowledge, or more accurately, knowledge claims contain elements of uncertainty, which people who hold these assumptions attribute to missing information or to methods of obtaining evidence. So although they use evidence, they do not understand how evidence entails a conclusion, especially in light of acknowledged uncertainty, and thus tend to view judgments as highly idiosyncratic. So this is quasi-reflective. So basically, people in this stage are, they're not taking things they're not taking things at face value, but they're not reflective quite yet. They're kind of starting to question the authority, starting to kind of really look, realize things are more complicated than at first appearance. And then finally, reflective reasoning, stages 6 and 7. Those are people who hold these assumptions, accept that knowledge claims cannot be made with certainty, but they are not immobilized by it. Rather, they make judgments that are most reasonable and about which they are relatively certain based on their evaluation of available data. They also believe that they must actively construct their decisions and that knowledge claims must be evaluated in relationship to the context in which they were generated to determine their validity. They also readily admit their willingness to reevaluate the adequacy of their judgment as new data or new methodologies become available. So basically, this is like, when people say, well, this is how I understand it based on my thoughts, my experience, my beliefs, my values, my opinions, but I'm open to other viewpoints. They're open to other viewpoints to think, maybe there's other answers, maybe their own experience is tainting their decision, and they're open to hear other perspectives. A little bit more about the 7 stages of reflective judgment by King and Kitchener. There's, breaking down the 7 stages a little bit more. Obviously, there's the big 3: pre-reflective, quasi-reflective, reflective thinking. Stage 1, knowledge is complete. Stage 2, knowledge is only available to the authority. Stage 3, knowledge is absolutely certain or temporarily certain. Stage 4, which in quasi is knowledge is uncertain and specific to the individual. Stage 5, knowledge is contextual and subjective. Stage 6 under reflective is knowledge is something that is constructed by the individual. And stage 7 is something that is inquiry based. I forgot to mention that, but that's very important. Basically, knowledge is always asking questions. There's always more questions. You can always dive deeper. That's really the basis of reflective judgment. We have our judgment, our thought, our thinking, our experience, our emotions. However, we can always, and we have what we think are the answers or the solutions, perhaps, but we can always ask more questions. And I'm running short on time. This is a really good example, so I encourage you to check out the PowerPoint that I share on Canvas. It's a really good example of full reflective judgment. So the summary: there is no right or wrong. We need evidence to figure out what is true or not accept as it is. There's no such thing as absolute or true knowledge. There is always more information to learn that will affect and or change understanding. Opinions are not absolute, and a wider perspective is necessary to find truth. Reflective judgment strengths: new way to think through complex problems. Introspective analysis of thoughts and feelings is tied to development. Considers others' views and perspectives. Helps students understand themselves in developmental terms and discover what experiences influence development. It's individually focused but externally impactful. The weakness is it kind of ignores the true inner conflicts and biases that exist, and these are very difficult to absolve. So, some of our experiences are traumatic, to be honest. So, it's really hard to, you know, trauma can frame. That's just an example. One example is trauma can frame our judgment and our thinking. So it's really hard to see around it or work around it, and sometimes it encourages skepticism. I'm sure we've all been around those people that there's a plan or an idea or a direction, and there's all constant questions, but usually that does lead to a more productive, complete direction. Here's the references, so you can check that I cited my sources and all that stuff, but that's about all I have for now. That's Reflective Judgment by King and Kitchener. Hope you all enjoyed it. See you in class on Tuesday, and thank you for making it through with me.